Hey everyone, we've got an exciting challenge. Let's try to hit 300 likes in the next 24 hours. If we make it, the top comment gets to choose our next story topic. Drop your ideas below and make sure to like the video. We're pushing towards 10k subscribers by next year, and every interaction helps these videos reach more awesome people like you. Now, let's dive into the story. The void of space held its breath as the Firefly's engines hummed to life, adjusting our trajectory towards the massive silhouette that had appeared on our long-range scanners. I pressed my hand against the cold observation window, watching as the ghostly shape of the colony ship Prometheus slowly emerged from the darkness between Saturn and Jupiter. "Katherine, you need to see this." Captain Marcus Wong's voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. His usually calm demeanor had cracked, revealing something close to fear as he gestured towards the main display screen. As lead xenobiologist aboard the Firefly, I'd seen my share of strange phenomena, but nothing prepared me for what crawled across our monitors. The Prometheus wasn't just covered in ice, it was transformed by it. Massive crystalline formations erupted from its hull like frozen tentacles, defying every known law of physics. Ice doesn't form like that in space. It doesn't grow in spiraling patterns that seem to pulse with their own inner light. "Those heat signatures make no sense," Amanda Torres muttered from her engineering station, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "We're getting readings of both extreme cold and inexplicable heat sources throughout the ship. It's like the ice is alive." The Firefly's bridge fell silent as we took in the full scope of what we were seeing. The Prometheus had vanished, without a trace a century ago, taking with it the hopes and dreams of 50,000 colonists bound for Europa. Now here it was, transformed into something that belonged in a nightmare, rather than the rational universe we thought we knew. Michael O'Brien, our security chief, cleared his throat. "Captain, protocols state we should call this in before attempting any contact." His hand rested instinctively on his sidearm, a gesture that seemed almost laughably inadequate against the scale of what we faced. "Look at those ice formations," Dr. James Cooper whispered, his historian's mind already racing with implications. "They're growing right before our eyes. If we wait for a response from command, we might lose our only chance to understand what happened here." I knew he was right. The patterns we were seeing were unprecedented, biological in nature, yet impossibly structured. As a xenobiologist, every cell in my body screamed that we were looking at something that could rewrite our understanding of life itself. Captain Wong stood at the viewport, his reflection overlaying the twisted shape of the Prometheus beyond. "Dr. Reynolds, what's your professional assessment?" I took a deep breath, knowing my next words would seal our fate. "Those formations aren't natural, Captain. They're showing signs of organization at a molecular level. If this is a first contact scenario, we have a scientific obligation to investigate." "And if it's not?" O'Brien asked quietly. The question hung in the air as we watched another crystalline spire burst from the colony ship's hull, reaching out into space like a grasping hand. "Then God help us," I whispered, because we might be looking at the reason why 50,000 people vanished without a trace. Captain Wong's jaw tightened as he made his decision. "Miss Torres, bring us alongside. O'Brien, prep the boarding equipment for extreme cold conditions. Dr. Reynolds, assemble your sampling kit. Dr. Cooper, I want every scrap of information we have about the Prometheus's original mission." He paused, looking each of us in the eye. "Whatever we find over there, we make sure the truth gets back to Earth. Those families have waited 100 years to know what happened to their loved ones." As the Firefly's engines powered up for our approach, I caught a glimpse of movement in the ice formations. A ripple that couldn't have been caused by any external force in the vacuum of space. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw something looking back at me through the crystalline structures, something vast and patient and hungry. The families of the Prometheus's passengers weren't the only ones who would learn the truth today. But as our ship drew closer to that frozen hell, I began to wonder if some truths were better left buried in the cold between the stars. The journey between the Firefly and the Prometheus was 200 meters of pure dread. Our shuttle glided through space, each second bringing us closer to the crystalline nightmare that the colony ship had become. The ice formations created a maze we had to navigate, massive translucent structures that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. 3 degrees port, Torres called out, her voice tight as she piloted us through the frozen labyrinth. That ice, it's not spreading randomly. Look at the patterns. She was right. Up close, the crystalline growths followed complex geometric patterns that were too perfect to be natural. Some segments appeared to catch the distant sunlight and refract it in impossible ways, creating aureoles of colour that shouldn't exist in the vacuum of space. Our team was sealed in advanced thermal suits, each rated for the deepest cold of space. Yet somehow I could still feel a chill seeping through as we approached the emergency airlock we'd identified as our entry point. Structural analysis complete, Torres reported, her tablets displaying a 3-dimensional map of the ship's hull. The airlock's integrity is intact, but these readings... Captain, I'm detecting temperature variations that shouldn't be possible. The ice seems to be generating its own thermal field. O'Brien checked his weapon for the 3rd time, a nervous habit I'd never seen from him before. Movement sensors are clear, but there's significant interference from those crystal formations. We're going in partially blind. The docking procedure felt like surgery, our shuttle carefully extending its umbilical to connect with the Prometheus's ancient airlock. The sound of metal connecting with metal resonated through our suits, and I swore I felt something else, a vibration that seemed to reach straight into my bones. Remember, Captain Wong said as we prepared to board, we're here to gather evidence and data. No unnecessary risks. Dr. Reynolds leads the biological investigation. Torres handles engineering, and O'Brien maintains security. Dr. Cooper will document everything. Stay together. Stay in communication range. The airlock cycle was unnervingly smooth for a century-old system. As the inner doors opened, our helmet lights illuminated a scene that defied explanation. The corridor before us was both familiar and utterly alien. Standard colony ship architecture was visible beneath layers of transformation. The walls, floor and ceiling were covered in sheets of that strange ice, but it wasn't chaotic. The formations followed precise paths like circuit boards made of crystal. My God, Cooper breathed, his historian's composure cracking. Look at them. Our lights had found the first bodies. They were perfectly preserved in the ice, frozen in moments of terror that had lasted 100 years. A woman reaching toward a closed door. A man shielding something in his arms. A child. I forced myself to focus on the scientific observations. The preservation is unprecedented. The ice appears to have some kind of antimicrobial properties. The cellular degradation is minimal. These patterns, Torres said, scanning the crystalline growths with her equipment. They're conducting energy. Very low levels, but it's there. The ice isn't just preserving the ship, it's using it. O'Brien's light caught something on the wall, and we all fell silent. Carved into the metal, barely visible beneath the ice, were symbols. They seemed to pulse with a faint blue luminescence that had nothing to do with our lights. Cooper, Captain Wong asked, any recognition of those markings? The historian shook his head. Nothing in any known human language or pattern, but they're not random. There's a clear structure to them, almost like... He was cut off by a sound that should have been impossible in the pressurized corridor, the sharp crack of ice shifting. We all turned to see one of the frozen handprints in the wall slowly pull back, as if whatever had made it was still moving, still trying to escape. We need to find the bridge, Captain Wong said, his voice steady despite what we'd just witnessed. The ship's logs might tell us what they found out here, what started this. As we moved deeper into the ship, our helmet lights caught more impossible scenes. Bodies frozen in mid-flight from something we couldn't see. Rooms where the ice had formed into perfect geometric shapes that rotated slowly without any visible means of support. And everywhere, those symbols, pulsing with their own inner light. Torres stopped suddenly, her hand raised. "Captain, I'm getting massive power readings from below us. Something in the cargo hold is still active after all this time." "That's impossible," Cooper said. "The power systems should have failed decades ago." "Tell that to whatever's down there," Torres replied, adjusting her instruments. "It's drawing power from somewhere, and the readings match the energy signatures in the ice." That's when we heard it, a deep, resonant pulse that vibrated through the deck plates and into our suits. It felt like a heartbeat, if the heart was the size of a mountain. "Captain," I said, checking my own readings, "that pulse, it's accelerating." The descent to the cargo hold was a study in escalating dread. Each deck we passed showed progressively more disturbing signs of the catastrophe that had claimed the Prometheus. The ice formations grew denser, more organized, forming structures that seemed to reach for us as we passed. "These readings are off the scale," Torres whispered, her sensor device pulsing with increasingly frantic data. "The energy signatures, they're similar to biological patterns but operating on a quantum level." The main cargo bay doors loomed before us, a massive portal now encased in crystalline growths that formed spiraling patterns around its frame. What stopped us cold wasn't the door itself, but the bodies. Dozens of colonists frozen in a circle around the entrance, all facing outward, as if they'd been guarding something, or containing it. "Look at their uniforms," Cooper observed, light playing across the frozen figures. These were the ship's security team. They died at their posts. O'Brien approached one of the bodies, his light illuminating the ancient weapon still clutched in frozen hands. Energy weapons. They were expecting something big. He paused, examining the ice around them. "Captain, the ice didn't spread from the outside in. These formations, they radiate outward from the cargo bay." The pulsing grew stronger as Torres worked to override the door's ancient mechanisms. Each beat now carried subsonic frequencies that made our teeth ache even through the protective helmets. When the doors finally began to move, they screamed with the sound of tortured metal and cracking ice. Nothing could have prepared us for what waited inside. The cargo hold was a cathedral of ice, but not the chaotic formations we'd seen above. This was architecture, deliberate and alien, rising in impossible spires and arches that defied gravity. At its center stood a structure that hurt to look at. A crystalline mass that seemed to exist in more dimensions than our minds could process. "That's the source," Torres said, her voice shaking as she consulted her instruments. "Whatever it is, it's generating enough energy to power a small city." Inside the central structure, suspended in the heart of the impossible crystal, was something that moved, not with the simple motion of a living thing, but with the fluid complexity of a thought given form. It shifted and flowed, never holding one shape long enough for our minds to grasp it. "Dr. Reynolds," Captain Wong's voice was tight. "Your professional opinion?" I stepped closer, my xenobiologist's training warring with primal instincts that screamed at me to run. "It's organic, but not like anything we've ever encountered. The crystal structure isn't containing it. It's part of it. An exoskeleton, maybe. Or a chrysalis." "A chrysalis implies metamorphosis," O'Brien said grimly. "What's it changing into?" Before I could answer, Cooper called us to a workstation near the wall. Unlike the others we'd passed, this one still functioned, its screen flickering with preserved data. "This is Dr. Howard's station. He was the Prometheus's lead scientist," Cooper explained, his fingers moving over the ancient controls. "He left notes. My God." The logs told a story that chilled us more than the surrounding ice. The Prometheus had discovered something during its journey, a signal that didn't match any known pattern. They'd altered course to investigate and found an object floating in deep space, a crystalline structure identical to what now grew throughout the ship. "They brought it aboard," Cooper read, his voice hollow. "They thought it was dormant. The final entry, it says, it's not ice, it's not crystal, it's a technology so advanced, it might as well be magic, and it's starting to wake up." The pulsing changed pitch, and we all turned to see the impossible shape in the crystal move with new purpose. Cracks appeared in the structure's surface, and something like atmosphere began to escape. Not air, but a glittering mist that seemed alive with purpose. "We need to leave," O'Brien started to say, but Torres cut him off. "Captain, the energy readings, they're climbing exponentially. It's using the ship's systems, redirecting power from somewhere. The temperature in here is rising." What happened next occurred with devastating speed. The crystal structure shattered, sending shards of impossible geometry flying across the cargo hold. The shape within unfurled itself into reality, expanding into dimensions that shouldn't exist. I saw geometries that made my mind recoil, colors that had no place in our universe, and movements that suggested the thing had never been contained. We had simply been unable to perceive most of its form. O'Brien opened fire, his energy weapon discharging bolts that the creature seemed to absorb and reflect, sending prismatic death dancing across the walls. The ice around us began to vibrate in harmony with the entity's movements, and I watched in horror as the frozen security team outside began to crack and splinter. "Run!" Captain Wong's order cut through the chaos. "Back to the shuttle, now!" But as we turned to flee, the glittering mist reached us first, and I witnessed the beginning of a transformation that would haunt my nightmares forever, if any of us survived to dream again. The mist moved with intelligent purpose, seeping into every crevice of the massive cargo hold. Where it touched the walls, new crystalline formations erupted with explosive force. The temperature began to rise dramatically, creating an impossible contrast with the surrounding ice. "The air filtration systems!" Torres shouted over our comms. "It's spreading through the ventilation." We ran through corridors that were transforming before our eyes. The ice that had seemed so solid was becoming fluid, reaching out with tendrils that tried to snare our feet. The frozen bodies we passed were changing too, the ice around them taking on new patterns, more complex geometries that pulsed within a light. O'Brien took point, his weapon ready as we rounded each corner. "The way back to the airlock is being blocked," he reported tensely. "The crystal growth is accelerating." Behind us, something screamed. It wasn't a sound that should have been possible in human architecture, a multi-toned shriek that existed in several frequencies at once. The deck plates beneath our feet began to vibrate in resonance. "Look!" Cooper's voice cracked as he pointed to one of the frozen colonists we'd passed earlier. The ice around the body was changing color, becoming translucent with swirling patterns inside. Then, to our horror, something moved within the crystalline cocoon. The ice shattered, and what emerged was no longer human. The figure was elongated. Its limbs stretched and multiplied. Its skin had become translucent, showing swirling patterns beneath that matched the ice around us. When it turned to face us, its eyes reflected dimensions that our minds couldn't process. "Keep moving," Captain Wong ordered. But more cocoons were breaking open around us. The transformed colonists moved with liquid grace, their bodies seeming to merge with and separate from the ice at will. Torres was frantically working her comm unit. "Firefly, do you copy? We need immediate evacuation. Firefly!" Only static answered her calls. We reached a junction where 3 corridors met and stopped dead. Each pathway was filled with the transformed beings, their bodies glowing with the same blue luminescence as the symbols on the walls. They moved in perfect synchronization, like parts of a larger organism. "The maintenance shaft," Torres said, gesturing to a panel in the wall. "It connects to the deck above us." O'Brien blasted the panel free, and we scrambled into the narrow vertical tunnel. As I climbed, I could hear the sounds of pursuit. Not footsteps, but the crystalline chorus of ice forming and reforming. Reaching the upper deck, we emerged into a scene of pure chaos. The mist had reached this level too, and the transformation was in full effect. The walls themselves seemed alive, geometric patterns growing and shifting like a living mathematics equation. "Dr. Reynolds," Captain Wong called out. "What are we dealing with? What's the endgame here?" I watched as another colonist emerged from its icy prison, its form twisting into something that belonged in no earthly taxonomy. It's not just transforming them, I realized with growing horror. It's networking them. Every transformed colonist, every crystal formation, they're becoming nodes in some kind of vast organic computer. A violent shudder ran through the ship, and new readings flashed across Torres's instruments. The hull is being transformed. The entire ship. It's becoming like them. That's when we saw it. Through a viewport that was rapidly being covered in crystal, we could see the Firefly. Our ship was dark, dead in space, with the same crystalline formations beginning to grow across its hull. "It's not just an infection," Cooper said, his historian's mind making connections. "The original entity, what we found in the cargo hold, it's a seed, and now it's calling others." As if to confirm his words, space itself seemed to ripple around the Prometheus. Points of light appeared in the void, but they weren't stars. They were approaching ships, each one encased in the same crystalline structures that had claimed our vessels. The alien fleet had arrived, drawn by the awakening of their ancient seed, and we had given them a bridge directly into human space. The realization that we were now cut off from the Firefly hit us like a physical blow. Our only escape route was blocked, and the crystalline infestation was spreading throughout both ships with terrifying speed. "We need to find another way off this ship," Captain Wong said, his calm voice belying the desperation of our situation. "Torres, any other shuttles or escape pods on the manifest?" Torres consulted her tablet, its screen flickering with interference from the growing crystalline structures. "There's an emergency shuttle bay 3 decks down, aft section. If it hasn't been completely frozen over." A rhythmic cracking sound interrupted her, ice forming and reforming in complex patterns. The transformed colonists were hunting us methodically, their crystalline bodies allowing them to navigate through the ship's structure in ways we couldn't predict. "Move," O'Brien whispered urgently. "They're herding us." We ran through corridors that were becoming increasingly alien. The ice formations had developed a kind of architecture, creating arches and spirals that pulsed with internal light. Every few meters we passed more transformation cocoons, some still in process, the sight of human forms being slowly reshaped by geometric patterns of living ice was enough to fuel a lifetime of nightmares. "In here," Torres hissed, gesturing to what had once been a research lab. We sealed the doors behind us, knowing it would only buy us moments. The lab was a museum of horror. Half-completed experiments were frozen in time, but the ice around them had formed into complex analytical structures, as if the crystalline intelligence was studying the human attempts to study it. Screens still flickered with partial data, their displays distorted by frost patterns that seemed to form equations. "Look at this," Cooper said, examining one of the workstations. They were analysing the first crystal formations when they appeared. "There's a pattern to the spread, a mathematical progression that..." A massive impact against the door cut him off. Through the reinforced window we could see our pursuers, a dozen or more transformed colonists, their bodies now so altered they barely registered as humanoid. They moved in perfect synchronization, their crystalline forms reflecting and refracting light in hypnotic patterns. "The ventilation system," I said, pointing to a maintenance access panel. "We might be able to..." The ceiling erupted in a shower of ice and metal. A transformed colonist dropped into the room, its body elongated and segmented like an insect made of living crystal. Multiple limbs ended in points of geometric precision, and what had once been a human face was now a complex arrangement of crystalline surfaces that reflected our own terrified expressions back at us. O'Brien's weapon discharged, the energy blast striking the creature directly. Instead of damaging it, the beam was caught in its crystalline structure, refracted, and split into a dozen smaller beams that scorched the walls around us. "The auxiliary corridor," Torres shouted, already prying open a side panel. "Hurry!" We scrambled through the narrow maintenance passage as the lab behind us filled with more transformed colonists. The passage was tight, barely wide enough for one person, which at least meant our pursuers would have to follow single file. But we hadn't counted on their ability to transform the ship itself. The walls around us began to shift, ice formations growing with mathematical precision. The passage was being reshaped, widened in some places and constricted in others, forcing us to move in specific directions. They're not just chasing us, I realized as we ran. This is deliberate. Every turn, every obstacle, they're forcing us deeper into the ship. "The engine core," Torres said, her eyes widening with understanding. "All these changes, the power they're drawing, they're redirecting everything to the core, and they're driving us right toward it." A crystalline tendril burst through the wall ahead of us, nearly impaling Cooper. We turned down another passage, only to find our way blocked by a transformed colonist, emerging from the ice like it was water. Its body shifted and flowed, geometric patterns rearranging themselves in ways that hurt to look at. "Back! Go back!" O'Brien shouted, but our original path was now blocked as well. The maintenance corridor had become a trap, with the transformed colonists herding us exactly where they wanted us to go. Captain Wong made a quick decision. "The only way is down. We need to reach that shuttle bay before we're completely cut off." As if in response to his words, the floor beneath us began to crack. Not randomly, but in precise geometric patterns that spread outward like a mandala made of ice and metal. We had seconds to realize what was happening before the entire section gave way, sending us plummeting into the transformed heart of the Prometheus. We fell through layers of the ship that had been completely remade by the crystalline intelligence. Everything human had been geometrically repurposed, transformed into something that served their alien mathematics. And all around us, more of the changed colonists emerged from the ice, their bodies glowing with internal light as they descended toward us like a swarm of crystalline angels. The last thing I saw before we hit the bottom was the engine core in the distance, no longer a fusion reactor, but a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with the same rhythm as the alien ships approaching outside. The impact should have killed us. Instead, the crystalline structures seemed to guide our fall, depositing us roughly, but alive in what had once been the ship's primary engineering control center. The room had been transformed into a cathedral of ice and geometry, with the pulsing engine core visible through massive windows that had no right to exist on a spacecraft. "The logs," Torres gasped, pulling herself up. "This was where they maintained the primary computer core. If there are any answers about what happened." She didn't need to finish. We all understood this might be our last chance to understand what we were facing before it consumed us completely. Captain Wong stood guard at one entrance while O'Brien covered the other. The transformed colonists hadn't followed us down, which only made me more certain that we were exactly where they wanted us to be. Cooper found the captain's private terminal, miraculously still functional beneath a layer of geometric ice. His fingers flew over the controls as crystals continued to grow around us. "Here," he said, his voice tight. "The captain's final logs. Playing them now." The screen flickered to life, showing an older woman with haunted eyes. The timestamp showed it was recorded 3 days after the Prometheus diverted its course. "This will be my final report." The captain's recorded voice was steady, despite her obvious fear. The object we discovered was not natural. Dr. Howard believes it's a seed of some kind, planted by an intelligence so far beyond us, we can't even comprehend their motives. They've been waiting out here between the worlds for someone to find them, to wake them up. The recording flickered as crystal formations grew across the screen. The captain's next words chilled us to the bone. The transformation started in the science team. At first we thought it was some kind of infection, but it's more than that. It's an upgrade. The crystalline structures aren't just changing their bodies, they're changing their minds. Those who transform can see things we can't, understand mathematics that our brains aren't capable of processing. They say we're being prepared. Another recording started automatically, dated 2 days later. The captain looked worse, with frost patterns clearly visible on her skin. The ship itself is being transformed. Every system, every component is being repurposed. We tried to destroy it, but the more we fought, the faster it spread. It's not just random growth, it's rebuilding us according to some vast plan. The changed ones say we're becoming part of something greater, a network that spans galaxies. The final log began to play, but the captain was barely recognizable. Crystalline patterns had begun to form across her face, and her eyes reflected geometric impossibilities. I understand now. We weren't meant to reach Europa. We were meant to find them. Humanity's first colony ship, the perfect vector to reach Earth. If you're seeing this, it's already too late. The seed is awakening, the others are coming, we are becoming. The screen shattered as crystal spikes erupted through it. Around us, the transformed engineering bay pulsed with increasing energy. Through the windows, we could see the engine core transforming into something that resembled a massive crystalline heart. "Torres!" Captain Wong's voice was urgent. "The shuttle bay. Can we still reach it?" She checked her tablet, now covered in a thin layer of frost. "Maybe if we cut through the maintenance tunnels beneath this level, but Captain, those energy readings from the core, they're building towards something." A beacon, I realized, watching new patterns form in the ice around us. The whole ship is becoming a transmitter, calling more of them. "Then we destroy it," O'Brien said firmly. "The fusion core may be transformed, but it's still powered by nuclear reactions. If we can overload it." A sound like breaking glass filled the air, but it wasn't just sound, it was pure geometry, translated into acoustic waves. The transformed colonists had found us, pouring into the room like a tide of living crystal. But they weren't attacking, they were waiting. That's when we saw her. The former captain of the Prometheus emerged from the crystalline walls, her transformed body a masterpiece of geometric perfection. When she spoke, her voice resonated on multiple frequencies simultaneously. "You've come to witness the awakening," she said, her words forming patterns in the air. "The next stage in human evolution. Resistance is mathematically impossible." The transformed captain moved with liquid grace, each step creating ripples in the crystalline floor. Behind her, dozens of changed colonists stood, in geometric formation, their bodies reflecting and refracting light in hypnotic patterns. "Look at what we've become," she said, gesturing to her crystalline form. "We're no longer bound by linear time or three-dimensional space. The mathematics of the universe are ours to command." "You're not commanding anything," Captain Wong stood firm. "You're being reprogrammed. Whatever these things are, they're not advancing humanity. They're erasing it." O'Brien had quietly positioned himself near a control panel, his fingers working the frost-covered surface. One glance at Torres confirmed my suspicion. They were trying to access the fusion core controls. The transformed captain tilted her head at an impossible angle, geometric patterns flowing beneath her translucent skin. "You still think in such limited terms. Let me show you what true evolution looks like." She reached out, and the ice around us began to move, not growing or spreading, but reshaping itself into what looked like a three-dimensional representation of space. Stars and galaxies formed in crystalline perfection, showing vast networks of geometric structures connecting them all. Their civilization spans galaxies, she explained, her voice resonating with multiple harmonics. For billions of years, they've been seeding the cosmos with their crystals, waiting for species advanced enough to find them, to join them. By losing everything that makes them unique, I countered, watching as O'Brien continued his work on the panel. Those aren't colonists anymore. They're nodes in an alien network. The captain's laugh was like breaking icicles. And what is humanity but an inefficient network of isolated consciousness? We are becoming something greater. The ships approaching now carry more seeds, more catalysts for transformation. Earth will become a new hub in their crystalline web. Torres suddenly called out, "Captain, the core is destabilizing. The transformations are affecting the containment field." The geometric patterns in the walls pulsed faster, and the transformed colonists moved forward as one. The captain's face showed something almost like concern. The process cannot be stopped. The beacon must activate. The others must be called. "Now!" Captain Wong shouted. O'Brien slammed his hand down on the panel, and alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The crystalline growths vibrated with increasing intensity as energy from the destabilizing core poured through them. "If we can't shut it down," O'Brien said grimly, "we'll overload it. This whole ship will go up before it can call any more of them." The transformed captain's expression shifted into something inhuman. "Unacceptable," she said, and launched herself forward with impossible speed. O'Brien opened fire, his energy weapons beam splitting and refracting through her crystalline body. Behind her, the other transformed colonists surged forward in perfect geometric formation. "The maintenance tunnel," Torres called out, prying open a panel in the floor. "It's our only chance." Captain Wong launched a plasma grenade, our last one, into the advancing crystalline horde. The explosion sent geometric shards flying as we dropped one by one into the tunnel below. I was the last to go, and what I saw before I dropped made my blood run cold. The transformed captain emerged from the explosion unscathed, her body flowing like liquid crystal, but it was her expression that terrified me. Not anger, but absolute certainty, as if our resistance was merely a mathematical equation that had already been solved. The tunnel was a nightmare of growing crystal and pulsing light. We ran as geometric formations tried to reshape themselves around us, threatening to trap us in living ice. "The shuttle bay is ahead," Torres called out, consulting her frost-covered tablet, "but the core temperature is critical. We have minutes at most." The final stretch to the shuttle bay became a gauntlet of crystalline horror. The ship's transformation had reached a fever pitch, with geometric patterns growing and reshaping themselves with desperate speed. The walls themselves seemed alive with calculation, as if the entire vessel was solving some vast cosmic equation. "The core's going critical," Torres shouted over the increasing whine of overtaxed systems. "The containment field is failing." We burst into the shuttle bay and froze. The emergency shuttle was there, but it was already being consumed by crystalline growth. Geometric patterns crawled across its hull like living mathematics, reforming the metal into alien configurations. "We have to clear it," O'Brien said, raising his weapon. "The crystals are thinner here, still forming. We might have a chance." A sound like shattering glass filled the bay. Through the walls came the transformed colonists, their bodies flowing through the crystalline structures as if they were water. The former captain led them, her geometrically perfect form radiating cold fury. "The equation must be completed," she said, her voice resonating on multiple frequencies. "The beacon will activate. Earth will ascend." Captain Wong stepped forward, putting himself between us and the crystalline horde. "O'Brien, Torres, clear that shuttle." Dr. Reynolds, help Cooper gather whatever data we can. Someone needs to warn Earth." "Captain," I started to protest, but he cut me off. "That's an order, Doctor. Humanity needs to know what's waiting out here." The transformed captain struck first, her crystalline form moving with impossible speed. Captain Wong met her with a burst from his plasma rifle, the energy splitting and refracting through her geometric body. The other transformed colonists surged forward like a tide of living crystal. O'Brien and Torres worked frantically to clear the shuttle, using concentrated energy bursts to shatter the forming crystals. Cooper downloaded everything he could from a nearby terminal, his fingers flying over controls that were rapidly being consumed by geometric patterns. I helped where I could, but I couldn't take my eyes off the battle raging behind us. Captain Wong fought with desperate courage, but for every crystalline form he shattered, 2 more emerged from the walls. The transformed captain moved like liquid geometry, each attack flowing with mathematical precision.
"Got it!"
Torres called out as the shuttle's airlock cleared. "We can—" The ship shuddered violently. Through the bay's viewport, I could see the engine core beginning to rupture, geometric patterns shattering as contained plasma leaked through. "Inside now," O'Brien ordered, laying down covering fire as we rushed for the shuttle. Captain Wong backed toward us, still fighting. "Go, I'll hold them." He never finished. A crystalline spear erupted from his chest, its geometric patterns flowing with horrible perfection. The transformed captain stood behind him, her body merged with the lethal formation. "The equation balances," she said almost sadly. "Your resistance was anticipated." "No!" I screamed, but O'Brien was already pulling me into the shuttle. Through tears, I watched Captain Wong's body begin to crystallize, geometric patterns flowing across his skin. Torres had the engines fired before the airlock even finished cycling. The shuttle tore free from the Prometheus's disintegrating hull, crystals shattering in our wake. Behind us, the massive colony ship was transforming one final time into something that resembled a geometrically perfect nova. "Brace!" Torres called out as the core finally breached. The explosion was like nothing I'd ever seen. The crystalline structures amplified it, sending out waves of geometric destruction that rippled through space itself. Our shuttle was caught in the blast wave, spinning end over end, as fragments of mathematically perfect shrapnel peppered our hull. When the chaos finally subsided, we looked back at where the Prometheus had been. Nothing remained but a field of crystalline debris, each piece still pulsing with faint internal light. The alien ships that had been approaching were gone, either destroyed or retreated. "We did it," Cooper said quietly. "We stopped them." But I wasn't so sure. As Torres plotted an emergency course back to Earth, I noticed something on my suit's sleeve. A tiny crystalline formation growing in a perfect geometric pattern. And somewhere in the darkness between worlds, I could have sworn I heard the sound of numbers being crunched.